Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name's Matt Goodrich, and I'm a product manager on the Android Enterprise team. It's not always I get the opportunity to stand up on stage after sort of a video like that, which hopefully got you a bit energized. So thanks to our marketing team for putting that together. What I wanted to do was really spend the next 45 minutes giving you an overview of what's new on Android Enterprise and what's coming up. I think over the last 3 or 4 years, we've made huge strides in Android's readiness for enterprise. I think if you had evaluated Android, 4 years ago, you probably would have thought there was maybe one or two things missing. But we've been working really, really hard. The team's worked very hard I think we can really now say categorically that Android is ready for business. But before we get started, I just wanted to sort of do a quick show of hands. How many of you feel like you've got a reasonable understanding of what Android Enterprise is at this point? Okay, so maybe a little under half. So what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit of time to set a bit of the context, get those of you that haven't sort of experienced Android Enterprise so far up to speed with what the basics are, and then we'll talk a bit more about what's new and next. So to start with, I really want to begin with the opportunity that Android poses for enterprises. Not only is Android the operating system that runs on your smartphone in your pocket or the tablet that you might carry around in your bag, it also runs on point-of-sale systems, virtual reality headsets, large-screen digital displays, and even IoT. Right? So suddenly we've got a single platform that covers a wide range of use cases. And across all of that, we have the same management and security capabilities, so you can then manage all of those different devices from the same pane of glass through your EMM, your Enterprise Mobility Manager, or your Unified Endpoint Management System. So really huge opportunity there. And Android is already a really prevalent operating system within the enterprise. So across the over 2 billion Android devices that are active now globally, there's about 300 million devices that are going to ship to enterprises this year, according to IDC. And what you see in these numbers is a sort of split between individually liable devices, so these might be purchased personally and then used at work, so BYOD, or also sort of choose your own devices where employers might provide devices as part of the employer benefits. And Android has 80% of that market, so quite close to the consumer market share of well into the 80%. So huge need really for enterprises to think about when they're offering BYO programs, like making sure Android is supported. In corporate liable, 68% of smart devices shipped into the enterprise are running Android. Right. So that's actually really interesting. And if as an enterprise you haven't already approved Android for use, or you're not even considering Android, then you're really in the minority now. And you think about the opportunities that you might be missing out on from that breadth of devices. So what we're going to talk about today is Android in 4 different categories. So first of all, we're going to talk a bit more about devices to fit your business and all of those different use cases. We're going to talk about how our management capabilities are really comprehensive and innovative in the mobile management space. We're going to touch a little bit on security, but my colleague Dave Kleidemacher is actually speaking later, who will dive into that in much more detail. And I'll touch a little bit on some of the other technologies that we're bringing into Android, which as enterprises you can benefit from. So let's first talk about the devices. And I already touched on just diversity of use cases, But here you can see that more explicitly. So all the way from the traditional use cases of smartphones and tablets through dedicated devices that a logistics worker might use when delivering a package to ensure real-time delivery tracking, through to shared devices, when you've got a shelf of devices that a worker might take out at the beginning of their shift and then put back at the end of their shift, and making sure that we can deal with the different login scenarios, deleting data from the devices when a user logs out to make sure you've got that sort of ephemerality of user data. Kiosk devices, embedded points of sale, digital displays are all kind of more of the dedicated sort of fixed cases. Virtual reality is something that's it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment. There's lots of talk about it, but enterprise is a really interesting use case for that. We're seeing companies go in and have more immersive training courses, particularly for field workers where they've actually got to experience some of the situations that they might find themselves in. Virtual reality can be a really interesting opportunity within the enterprise. And similarly, augmented reality, when you're actually in a sort of a field worker scenario and you need help, being able to overlay that against your field of view rather than having to look up in a text document on a tablet, for example. And then finally, IoT is an emerging area. There's obviously lots of presentations here this week about IoT and how Google Cloud is going into that area. And Android, with the recent launch, GA launch of Android Things, is also getting present in there too. One of the challenges we've heard about the broad range of devices, though, is that, well, how do I choose the devices that I want in my enterprise? Right? There are over 400 different manufacturers developing devices with running Android, and so navigating that ecosystem is really, really difficult. So what we did earlier this year was we launched a program called Android Enterprise Recommended. What this does is it creates a higher level of requirements around things like security, device capabilities, and the consistency of the user experience across devices to make sure that it's easier for IT decision makers to decide which devices to purchase, and then be confident that those devices have the longevity and the simplicity required of an enterprise environment. So a lot of that sort of focuses on selection, but particularly a point which has been painful in the Android ecosystem is around updates. And so what we do with Android Enterprise Recommended is that those devices are required to have 90-day security patch updates for 3 years after the release of that device. And they also have to have at least one desert release update as well. So that's starting to sort of push the Android ecosystem into a more sort of updated mode. We've already got now over 40 devices from 9 different manufacturers. And this just gives you some examples of some of the devices that are already ranged. Now you'll see that these are all kind of high-end knowledge worker devices. What we're doing now is we're working with the OEMs to also come down the range of price points to have a sort of wide range of mid-tier and lower-tier devices as well. What we're starting to hear from customers who are aware of the Android Enterprise Recommended program, sorry, I'll try and get out of the way so you can see, is that the list of devices that we've approved through AER is actually helping customers now select not only the kinds of devices that they want to purchase themselves as corporate liable devices, but also the set of devices that they're willing to support as part of a bring your own device program. Right? So this was a survey that we sent out to our customers just recently, and really starting to show a high degree of traction there. How are we evolving Android Enterprise Recommended? Well, we're bringing in new device types, so we've got a rugged device program coming in soon, so slightly different set of requirements there, things like drop test requirements coming in. We're also looking at applying the principles of Android Enterprise Recommended to different partner types, to the EMM and UEM type vendors, systems integrators as well. And then we're also developing programs for carriers and developers too. So we can give a degree of confidence to our customers that these products and services have reached a sort of higher bar. So my colleague Ken Schutt is actually going to be talking in the next slot after this, over the way in Moscone West, in much more detail about all these programs. So if you want to hear more, do catch his session later on. So let's change gears now and talk about the comprehensiveness of Android's management framework. And the way I want to start here is with the range of different modes of operation that we have for Android devices. So starting on the left-hand side there, for bring your own device, we have this concept called a work profile. What a work profile does is it's a separate user really in the Android operating system. But it's the apps and the data are shown to users at the same time in the launcher, and they're badged with that little briefcase icon there, so users can see whether they're using the work app or the personal app. And you can navigate between these apps just as you would any other two apps personally. But the benefits are that you can set policies around how enterprise data can be shared. You can switch off things like copy-paste or sharing between apps through the share sheet on apps. But also benefit for the user, right? The user can be confident that their personal usage of their own device isn't being monitored by their IT department. And should they leave the company, the only thing that the IT department can delete is the corporate data, the work apps and data, leaving all of their personal apps and data entirely untouched, right? So, but benefit actually for both sides. It's also now possible to be able to switch off the work profile, like on an evening or a weekend or when you're on vacation, which just sort of enhances that the capability to keep work separate and out of your personal life. Then moving on to the company-owned side of things, we can also have a fully managed device which has a few more capabilities around things like factory reset protection, and being able to control what Wi-Fi hotspots a device can attach to, things like VPN as well. But also you can add a work profile to that. So you've still got the benefits of the data separation, but if you're a company that wants to allow your users to use the corporate devices personally and have your employees only carry around one device, which is very convenient for them, then you can certainly do that in a managed way. Of course, you can have just a solely fully managed device, which is corporate only. And then we've also got a mode similar to the fully managed device, which is what we call dedicated. So this is where you can lock a single or a very small number of apps to a device, reduce access to things like settings or recents or notifications even. And so if you've got a device, for example, for a logistics worker, right, who wants to focus solely on delivering packages and navigating to their next drop-off point, then you can do that without any risk of the user accidentally or intentionally changing settings and causing their device to no longer work. So, comprehensive set of different modes depending on the particular use case that you're trying to roll out. I want to highlight here just the length of time and effort that we've really spent on building out the feature set within Android Enterprise. We started off in Lollipop with the initial iteration of the work profile and the fully managed device, and have continued to evolve that over time through to Android Oreo, which was obviously released last fall. And then Android P that we've got coming out fairly shortly, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The investment that we've been making over the 4 years has really sort of shone through in terms of the adoption that we've seen from enterprises globally, actually. This is not just focused on North America. We've also seen extensive deployments in EMEA and JAPAC. And over the last 2 years, we've consistently seen 10x growth in that. So if you're considering now rolling out Android Enterprise, you can be confident that we're here to stay, because this is really sort of a high growth strategic project from Google. So let's talk a bit more about how do we build features in? What are the principles by which we are evolving Android Enterprise? First of all, we believe that any modern operating system should enable a user to just carry around a single device, right, for work and for personal. Of course, if the IT policies allow that, but if there are cases where that isn't possible, we still haven't quite got our work profile right, so we will continue to evolve until we can make sure that every user who is today carrying around 2 devices can actually just carry around 1. I already touched a little bit on the one platform concept, but it's really, really crucial that we allow a single management capability across all of those different use cases, and we will continue to strive to make sure that happens. And then the other thing is ensuring that app developers don't have to build the same app multiple times for different container technologies. Right? So the work profile is built into the Android operating system and will run any app. Right? There is no need for any additional SDK or any kind of app wrapping that's historically been required. So let's talk a little bit about a number of those things. And one of the challenges that we've really had for a long time now, since we launched Android Enterprise, is, well, isn't this just Samsung Knox? And like, what's the difference between Samsung Knox and Android Enterprise? And to date, it's really been a choice for buyers of Samsung devices. Well, do you enroll this in Knox, or do you enroll it in Android Enterprise? Well, as of Android Oreo and Knox 3.0, those 2 things are now coming together. Right? And now Samsung Knox, the additional APIs and capabilities that Knox brings, is built on top of the basic Android Enterprise concepts of fully managed and work profile. So when you deploy Knox, you're actually already deploying Android Enterprise with that extra bit on top, right? So you no longer have to make a choice about what you're deploying. You could even start with Android Enterprise and then upgrade to Knox at a later date. So really exciting sort of convergent story there, and we continue to work closely with Samsung to evolve that relationship further. You can see more information from Samsung about the unification just there. Another thing about one platform, and if you saw the previous session where Mike Burr was hosting a number of partners and customers just before this, we've got an increasing number of companies working on dedicated devices. So here are 3 customer examples of cases where they're deploying, in some cases, quite interesting hardware, and then locking apps to that screen to focus user attention on the task that equipment is designed for. So on the left-hand side here, Marks and Spencer's, which is a very large retailer in the UK, deploying dedicated devices to their store, the shop floor assistants, to really give them real-time information to help customers with their shopping. Pitney Bowes was actually on stage, I saw over the way there just earlier, who have got a famous brand here in the US. They have a product which is a postage meter, so you can print postage labels and things and pay for the postage with the device, but now it's a connected product actually running Android, and that's enabled a wide range of developers and apps to come onto that platform to actually extend the capabilities of a product that they already have within the office. And then Chronopost is a European logistics company who have just rolled out Android devices as well. And you see, like, by the numbers, substantial volumes of devices for these kinds of sectors. So I already mentioned Android P, and there's certainly no let up in Android in terms of the investment that we're putting in. And a couple of focus areas I want to talk about. We're focusing down on more dedicated devices, and particularly around things like shift workers and shared devices. So imagine you've got a factory or a warehouse where you've got shift workers. They sign out a device at the beginning of their shift. They can log in and get the apps and services that they need as that particular individual, right? They don't need to worry about getting the right device for the apps. The device will adapt to them if they have different needs, right? And we provide that now natively in the platform. We're also introducing a new, slightly updated user experience for the work profile to really help users better understand this concept of separation between the work and personal apps. We felt that the ability to mix and match the apps across your launcher in any which way is sometimes a little counterintuitive to users who don't understand correctly how the data separation works. So we're refining that. The other exciting thing about Android P is that for the first time in Android's history, not only have we launched the beta program for Google's own hardware, of course the Pixel, we've also launched the beta program for 7 other OEMs, right? And the reason why that's been possible this time is because of investments we made in Oreo, where we introduced a project called Project Treble. You might have heard of that. It was talked about a lot in the press when we launched at I/O last year. But what that introduced is a hardware abstraction layer between all of the device drivers and the kernel versus the rest of the OS, all the system libraries, the UI, etc. And what that's meant is it's much simpler for the OEMs, the device manufacturers, to update the operating system on top of that existing board support package for the lower level code. And so now is a really, really good opportunity to get devices into your labs to start testing, really the latest functionality, because it's coming down the pike actually quite a lot quicker than previous releases. My colleague James is actually going to be talking in a lot more detail with some demos as well on the new features in Android P. So if you're interested in that, do check that out at 3:15 over in the Metreon. Let's sort of touch a little bit on deployment. So management's all very sort of well and good, but unless you can simply deploy those devices into an enterprise, you're still going to have some challenges. Android has actually got a choice of different ways that you can bootstrap enrollment, and this is particularly focused on the fully managed kind of devices. You can use QR codes or NFC for NFC-compatible devices. You can have a text to token that's issued by your EMM. But the most recent addition, which we introduced in Android Oreo, is Zero Touch. So let's just talk a little bit about the details of Zero Touch. What this does is it gives you a completely seamless experience when unboxing a device, right? So you don't have to send devices down a sort of a white glove service or have them pre-enrolled by an IT administrator. As soon as the user unboxes that device, powers it on, and connects it to a network, and if it's a smartphone, you might have a SIM in there which will just get a network anyway, then it will automatically read its configuration and its enrollment details from a server, and then immediately download that managing app, whichever app it is, from whichever of your favorite EMM is, and then it will apply the policy immediately. So you're up and running really in very little time, with very little opportunity for the user to make mistakes as well. The other cool thing about this is if you were to try and set up the device without connecting to a network, right? Of course, it can't talk to the server to get its policy, but as soon as that device does connect to a network, it goes, aha, I should have been enrolled in full management and force the user to factory reset it and then go into an enrollment cycle. So it's also a little bit of a kind of sort of theft protection or protection against misuse as well. So just a little bit more about how that works. Well, we need to get cooperation from a number of different stakeholders. Remember here, we're not just doing this for one device manufacturer. We're doing it for a whole ecosystem, and that has quite a few challenges. So first of all, we need manufacturers to certify their solutions with us, and also ensure that they are putting unique serial numbers onto devices. That's actually not always happened in the past, so there's some process assurance that needs to happen. We work with carriers and resellers as sort of the trusted channel partner to ensure that when devices are sold, they're assigned to the correct customer within Google's back-end systems to enforce that enrollment. Because what we want to avoid is any sort of device hijacking after a device is sold, right? So we ensure that there. And then from a customer perspective, they can use their EMM then to apply the correct policy to that device so that when it boots into an enrolled state, it's straight in with the right settings. So we've already been working extensively with partners in all of those areas. And so this gives you a sense of all of those different partners that support Zero Touch today. And we've got more coming soon on the manufacturers. There are a lot of the more dedicated type devices from companies like Panasonic, Honeywell, and Zebra. And there's more sort of EMMs and carriers in the pipe as well, which unfortunately I can't disclose today. But you'll see, not just sort of region-specific, but organizations from around the world who are participating in this program. So we're super excited with the velocity that we've got there. I want to switch gears now, talking about app management. And what we do with app management in Android is actually we leverage Google Play and then add our management layer on top to make sure that IT departments have full control of what's going on. Now, the question you're all saying is, well, why would I want to use Google Play, which is like full of games and all that sort of stuff for managing enterprise apps? Well, the great thing about Google Play is it's a huge platform. It's secure. It sort of authenticates the install of those apps, and it makes sure that apps are appropriately signed. It has global server footprint, so we can always deliver the best experience to your users in terms of download performance wherever they are in the world. It applies patch updates, so you don't have to download the same APK over and over again. And we also do APK scanning, which is of course part of our security model. But if you're thinking about private apps or internally developed apps, right, well, why would you want your APKs scanned? Well, the interesting thing about private apps is that very often you're using third-party SDKs. You might be employing an agency to build it for you, and you've got no idea what coding standards they uphold. So APK scanning not only scans for bad things happening around malware, but also against sort of vulnerable third-party SDKs. So avoid things like Heartbleed in OpenSSL, for example. It also comes with comprehensive publishing tools, which you can use for your private apps, crash and performance reporting, other reporting tools in terms of installs. It manages updates for you. And then recently we just announced at Google I/O this concept of an Android app bundle, where for different devices you might download different assets. So let's say you've got different image densities, different resolutions of images assets within your APK. Well, what Android App Bundle does is it selectively installs just the assets that are required for the device that's being installed, rather than everything. And that saves you bandwidth, it saves you battery life, and it saves you storage on the device. So lots of reasons why Google Play is a great platform to build on top of. And then bring the management on top of that. You can then curate an enterprise store using, of course, a familiar user experience for your users. You can silently push install apps. So for example, when a device is enrolled, you can push apps automatically as soon as that device boots up so that a user is ready to work immediately. You can also push configurations to those apps. So for example, a VPN app can be quite complicated to set up. There's lots of different, quite technical parameters there. But you can make sure that a user doesn't have to worry about that by sending the configuration bundle down to the app at the same time as the install. I already commented on the ability to distribute private apps, and we make sure that those are logically separate from any public apps on Play, so you can be confident that they are only distributable to your employees. But you can also arrange them within your enterprise app store side by side with public apps. So an employee doesn't really have to worry about whether this is a private app or a public app. They just install the apps that are authorized to them. And then finally, the new thing that we've introduced very recently is a data processing agreement as part of our contractual terms for Managed Google Play. What that means is that we've now got a contract in place to give you confidence that we will only use any data that we collect for providing the Managed Play service and not for anything else. Recently, we've made some improvements to Managed Play, of course. It's now possible to programmatically publish private apps rather than having to go into a separate console, which is the Play publishing console. So there's a short link there if you want to look at that. If you want to build that into your own publishing tools, for example, or your development workflows internally. There's a new API now to determine how and when app updates happen, so whether you allow them only over Wi-Fi, or you'll also permit them over cellular, or not at all. And you can also do per device app authorization. So historically, that was always done on a user basis. But if the same user has a BYO smartphone and a corporate-owned tablet, you might actually want to offer them different sets of apps for that same user for different security environments, and that's now possible. We're also introducing some additional UI features. So this is sort of an embeddable widget that your EMMs will be able to embed, and you'll be pleased to know if you're using Google Mobile Management as part of G Suite, these features are going to come in as soon as they launch later on this quarter. So there'll be a visual user interface for publishing private apps. So as part of the same EMM experience, you no longer have to chop and change between consoles. We're introducing the concept of web app publishing. So you'll be able to push like a web app to the user's launcher so that they can go straight to the intranet or other web tools that you might have. And they're also building a sort of a drag and drop store builder. So when you're curating an enterprise app store, you can actually create clusters of apps. You can place the apps where you want in a very visual way, drag and drop to make it very, very quick to curate that enterprise app store and get that out to your users. Finally, I want to talk about the Android Management API, which is a new API that we've built that really enables bespoke solutions within an enterprise, or indeed developers who want to build device management into a wider solution. So maybe you're building, I don't know, a meeting room management product, right? But you want to manage those sort of like tablets within the meeting room as part of the same product. And actually, Android Management API is the best way now to start doing it. It's a cloud API, so rather than having to build a sort of an agent app on the device, you can just send policies over that API. And so it's much, much simpler to have a single consistent API rather than having to build a agent, talk to Managed Play separately, send push notifications separately as well. Very, very powerful. We're updating that every 6 weeks. We have a comprehensive set of functionality. Not quite everything that Android OS offers directly yet, but we're getting there. And it's built by the same team that builds the OS, right? So we make sure that we're implementing the features exactly the way as they were designed. And it's policy-based, so you don't need to worry about all of the different sequence of interactions. You can set a policy and then just forget about it. So I'm actually going to be talking in much more detail about that. If you're interested, it'll be here tomorrow afternoon at 4:35. Okay, let's quickly touch on security. And Android really takes a defense-in-depth approach to security. So let's start at the bottom. On the hardware side, we support dedicated security hardware, whether that's a trusted execution environment as part of the standard chipset, which is usually a dedicated part of the processor on board, or indeed discrete secure element hardware, which adds extra tamper resistance to the product. And some of the tasks that can achieve are, first of all, managing authentication through things like keylock, managing your encryption keys, and other very sensitive tasks. The OS itself is hardened against potential attack. Right? So we employ a number of different technologies to ensure that. Things like address randomization to make sure that if a hacker achieves a particular exploit, it's very much more difficult to replicate that from one device to the next. We, of course, have the management APIs, which can enforce your management and security policies over the top. And then Google Play Protect, which is a always-on, call it a antivirus or an anti-malware product, which always is adapting to identify and remove the latest malware from devices. So really keeping sort of end-to-end protection. I'm not going to go into any more detail on security at this point. Dave Kleidermacher, who's the VP of Android Security, is going to be presenting there shortly this afternoon. So if you're interested in that, do check that out. Finally, I want to close with just the level of innovation that you benefit from when you invest in Android. So this is not necessarily specific enterprise features, but many, many different things going on. I just want to call out a few. So I've already touched on augmented reality, but if you want to sort of build some of these cutting-edge experiences, whether that's for training or for field services, AR Core is a really good place to start. AR Core is a library which does some of the heavy lifting for you, so you can focus on really the value-add elements of your app. So things like motion tracking, detecting surfaces which you can then place objects on virtually, or light estimation, so you can really make sure that your objects are rendered appropriately for the environment that you're looking at. All of that is taken care for you, so you don't have to worry about the detailed challenges with some of the sensors. Machine learning, obviously a huge topic here at Next this week, but Android supports a whole stack of different capabilities. So at the bottom of the stack here, you've got the Neural Networks API. So that's a native API on Android that really helps you figure out which is the most optimal hardware to use for your inference and for your learning. So if all you've got is a CPU, then it'll default to that, all the way up to some of the latest devices have TPUs built into them, and of course, Neural Networks API will make sure that those fastest hardware is used. TensorFlow Lite then abstracts that a bit further, and you can build neural nets very quickly with just a few lines of code, all the way up to MLKit, which enables you to do your learning in the cloud, compress that neural network model, and then deploy it to devices for inference very, very quickly. Devices like here, the Huawei P20, have already got that TPU chip built in, And here you can see a performance improvement of 10x. So a tenth of the time taken to do a neural network inference using this product. So really huge advancements taking place across the Android ecosystem there. And then another thing, I already mentioned IoT, but Android Things went GA earlier this year, and a huge opportunity for enterprises to leverage the same technologies that we've built, whether that's from the security side, so making sure you've got things like hardware root of trust and all the encryption key support, all the way up to the connectivity options and the management support that you need. So just then to conclude, I really encourage you, when you're thinking about mobile devices and endpoints in general, think beyond the knowledge worker situation or scenario of like devices in people's pockets, and think about what are the opportunities you have to improve employee workflows or even end customer experiences, whether that's in a retail store or elsewhere. Take a look at the Android Enterprise Recommended program. If you are in the process or soon to be looking at what devices to purchase, Android Enterprise Recommended can give you a really good sense of what are the devices that meet some of those critical enterprise requirements, and also what are those, could you leverage that for curating the set of devices that you support within BYOD. And then finally, when you're purchasing your devices, make sure that you're doing that through a zero-touch enabled reseller, because as you're purchasing them, then that reseller will be able to mark those in the zero-touch system that are owned by you, and then you can benefit from that really frictionless approach to enrolling devices when they're deployed to users. And then finally, take a look at Android P. There's now 8 different device manufacturers that support that, so really great opportunity now to get that into your test labs and see what the opportunities are that brings. So with that, just to close, here's a quick summary of the other sessions going on about Android Enterprise this week. Feel free to take a photo. The only one I haven't mentioned is the last one, using mobile as a catalyst for digital transformation. My colleague Sean, sorry, I'll get out of the way, then you can take a photo. My colleague Sean is going to be talking through sort of a bit more high level around like how can you apply Android and its technologies to really transform businesses. Thank you very much.